You know, when you picture the modern battlefield, it is incredibly tempting to think of it kind of like a video game.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you imagine a pilot sitting in a comfortable chair, looking at this high definition screen, holding a joystick, and they have like absolute moral clarity. The targets are clearly marked with little red boxes, and with just the simple push of a button, it's over.
Right. It feels detached, very binary.
Exactly.
It's this very clean, sanitized image that Hollywood just loves to sell us, It implies that distance somehow removes the complexity, the friction, and, well, the deeply human element from warfare.
But then you look at what's actually happening right now in the world of military drones, and that video game illusion just completely shatters.
It really does.
When you dig into the operations manuals and the tactical reports, you realize you are looking at a landscape that is incredibly messy, physically exhausting, and legally fraught. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring the rapidly evolving, high-stakes reality of military drones.
And we're going to look way beyond those myths, right? To understand the massive technological leaps happening in the skies right now, the incredibly strict physical realities inside the cockpit, and the complex international legal frameworks that actually govern when and how these machines are used.
Yeah, and to do that, we are drawing on a really fascinating stack of material today.
A very dense stack.
Yeah, dense is the word. We've got everything from a recent May 2026 Defense One article on drone combat, a 2024 Simple Flying piece on the future MQ Next replacement, and a 2025 Army Recognition article on the Marines' new MQ-9A extended range drone.
Plus the literal 2023 Air Force MQ-9 operations manual, which is wild to read, and a deeply comprehensive RAND Corporation analysis on the international laws of targeted killing.
So our mission today is to give you a shortcut to being deeply well-informed about what actually happens when a drone takes flight, from the engineering to the human operators, all the way to the legal war rooms.
But before we jump into the hardware, we really need to lay down a crucial disclaimer for you.
Yes, very important.
Because our sources today, especially that RAND report, deal with highly politically charged topics. We're talking U.S. drone policies, targeted killings, international law. So we want to be absolutely clear here. We are acting strictly as impartial guides.
Right, we aren't taking sides here.
Exactly. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of these documents. We are simply unpacking the ideas, the events, and the legal frameworks exactly as they are outlined in the original source material.
Yeah, our goal is just to synthesize this complex information so you can understand the mechanics and the policies without any editorializing on our part.
Just the facts.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand the rules of drone warfare, you first got to understand the hardware. The physical threats on the battlefield are forcing this technology to adapt at, like, a breakneck speed.
It's moving incredibly fast.
Yeah, I was reading that recent Defense One article, and it highlights a massive tactical shift. The U.S. Air Force is now actively using the MQ-9 Reaper, which is, a drone traditionally used to drop bombs on the ground, to shoot down other aerial targets.
Right, air-to-air combat.
Yeah. And the catalyst for this seems to be Operation Epic Fury, which started in February 2026. We're talking about the U.S. losing nearly 40 aircraft to swarms of Iranian Shahed drones. But the part that blew my mind is that these Shahed one-way attack drones, they only cost about $30,000 to make.
And that right there is why the economics of modern war have fundamentally shifted.
It's crazy.
It is. Historically, the U.S. military's response to an aerial threat has been to scramble fighter jets armed with highly sophisticated air-to-air missiles. We are talking about munitions that can easily cost upwards of $1 million apiece.
Wow.
So when an adversary deploys a swarm of cheap one-way attack drones, their goal isn't necessarily to overpower you technologically.
Right.
Their goal is to bankrupt your munitions stockpile.
It's literally like swatting a $30 mosquito with a solid gold brick.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Like, you might kill the mosquito, but you're going to run out of gold bricks very quickly. It is completely unsustainable.
It creates a massive strategic vulnerability. So the solution tested by the Air Force is brilliant in its pragmatism. Instead of the $1 million missile from a fighter jet, they armed the MQ-9 Reaper with APKWS missiles.
And that stands for Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System, right?
Exactly.
But those only cost between $25,000 and $40,000. How does that actually work? Like, how do you suddenly make a cheap missile that can hit a moving drone?
Well, the genius of the APKWS is that it isn't an entirely new missile. The military has massive stockpiles of unguided Hydra 70 rockets.
Oh, those are basically dumb rockets.
Yeah, dumb rockets that cost almost nothing.
Yeah.
The APKWS is just a laser guidance kit that screws into the middle of that existing dumb rocket.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so as the rocket fires, little laser-seeking optics fold out of the wings, allowing it to track and destroy a moving target in the air. You are essentially turning a cheap rocket into a precision weapon. It changes the math entirely.
You finally have a cost-effective defense. You're trading a $30,000 Mosquito for a $30,000 swatter. That makes total sense.
It really does.
And while the weapons are adapting, the platforms themselves are getting massive upgrades. According to that 2025 Army recognition piece, the Marine Corps just inducted the MQ-9A Reaper Block 5 extended range drone.
The ER variant.
Yeah, they strapped these retrofittable fuel pods onto the wings, pushing its flight endurance to over 30 hours. And it's packed with a sensor suite that includes something called synthetic aperture radar.
Right, synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, which is crucial for persistent overwatch.
How does that work?
Well, traditional radar uses a massive antenna to get a high-resolution image, which you obviously can't fit on a drone. SAR gets around this by using the flight path of the drone itself. As the drone flies forward, it constantly pulses radar waves. Then the computer stitches all those pulses together to simulate an antenna that is miles long. This allows the drone to generate incredibly detailed, photo-like maps of the ground below, completely seeing through clouds, smoke, or total darkness.
That is wild. So you have this unblinking eye in the sky that doesn't need to land for a day and a half.
Basically, yeah.
But the Simple Flying article we looked at outlines a program called MQ-9, which looks past the Reaper entirely. The Air Force is designing stealthy drones with hybrid electric engines.
Right, to reduce thermal and acoustic signatures.
Exactly. And the focus seems to be heavily on autonomy. Modular payloads, swapping between electronic warfare, strike, and surveillance, all operating in contested airspace without constant direct human control.
Yeah, the overarching theme of MQ-9 is survivability.
Makes sense.
The traditional MQ-9 has operated largely in environments where the U.S. had total air superiority. Against a near-peer adversary with advanced radar and air defenses, a standard Reaper is highly vulnerable.
It's just a slow target.
Exactly. So the push for autonomy is meant to allow swarms of these MQ-9 platforms to penetrate defended airspace, share data organically, and adapt to threats way faster than a human operator ever could.
But hold on, let's pump the brakes on the autonomous sci-fi swarm future for a second.
Sure.
Because we just talked about AI integration in MQ-9, but when you actually open up the 2023 Air Force Operations Manual...
Oh, yeah, the AFMN.
Yeah, the reality of flying these things today is intensely, almost painfully manual. I mean, the pilots are doing ops checks every single hour, checking fuel, oil, data links. It is an incredibly strict human effort.
The contrast is stark, isn't it?
It really is.
The technology is advancing, but the operational discipline required to safely manage a modern drone is rooted in very traditional, uncompromising aviation fundamentals.
Right.
Technology always relies on human operational discipline.
Yeah, just look at the ground control station, the GCS. It's not a casual gaming room. It is a sterile, windowless metal container. The environment is heavily restricted to basically just the pilot in command and the sensor operator. And the physical rules are wild.
Yeah, they are.
The manual explicitly forbids pilots from putting items like paper checklists or charts anywhere behind the condition lever, the throttle, or the flap lever to prevent interfering with the controls.
Because the physical linkage in that trailer actually matters. If a piece of paper slips and physically jams the throttle during a critical phase of flight, you lose the aircraft.
Which is crazy to think about.
That rule highlights that despite the screens and the data links, there are physical controls manipulating a very real, very heavy aircraft thousands of miles away.
And they are checking things constantly. I mean, they are obsessively monitoring the weather. Even with automatic takeoff and landing capabilities rolling out, humans monitor everything. They cannot take off in severe turbulence or if there is any frost, ice, or snow on the wings.
We'll connect that to the physical upgrades we discussed earlier. Remember those wing-borne fuel pods that give the Marines 30 hours of flight time?
Right.
Adding that fuel pushes the MQ-9's weight over 10,500 pounds.
Wow.
This introduces a massive challenge for the human pilot known as heavyweight flying.
Right, because aerodynamics don't care if the pilot is in the cockpit or sitting in a trailer in Nevada.
Exactly. At 10,500 pounds, The manual warns that the aircraft's handling characteristics degrade drastically.
Huh.
The climb rate slows to a crawl.
Makes sense, it's heavy.
Yeah, and the turn radius widens significantly. If the pilot banks the drone too hard while it's heavy, the wings just can't generate enough lift, and the aircraft will simply stall and fall out of the sky.
Gee.
So pilots are ordered to keep stall protection enabled. It requires immense physical awareness of an aircraft the pilot can't even feel in their seat.
So you have these pilots wrangling a 10,000-pound aircraft on the edge of a stall for 30 hours at a time? But the physics of the aircraft is really only half the battle, because the second they turn their cameras on, they hit a massive legal wall.
Oh, absolutely. The operational rules of engagement dictate every movement, and they are arguably as complex as the aerodynamics.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about flying an MQ-9 domestically, like inside U.S. national airspace.
Okay.
The operations manual outlines that you need FAA certificates of authorization, and you have to adhere strictly to intelligence oversight laws. It's like having the ultimate zoom lens, but being legally blindfolded.
That's a great analogy. The MQ-9 possesses sensors that can read a license plate from miles in the air.
Right.
But the domestic privacy mandate is absolute. There's an absolute prohibition on non-consensual surveillance of U.S. persons or private property.
The manual literally says that if a domestic flight falls outside very specific pre-approved exceptions, it requires direct written approval from the Secretary of Defense.
Which is a huge hurdle.
Right. You have the technology to look at anything, but the manual essentially says, don't even think about looking unless the Secretary of Defense says so.
And that extreme caution extends to weapons training, too. When these crews are practicing strikes, the manual requires them to stay 2 switch positions away from launch.
Okay, what does that mean?
The master arm switch has to be physically set to safe, and the physical trigger must be deselected. The software allows them to practice the approach, but there is a hard physical barrier preventing an accidental release.
But what happens when things go wrong mechanically? The manual has an entire section on abnormal operations, and the most terrifying scenario has to be hung ordnance.
Oh, a hung store condition is an aviation nightmare.
It sounds bad.
It is. This happens when the pilot commands a bomb to release. The software tells the bomb to drop, but a mechanical failure prevents the shackle from opening.
So it just stays there.
Yeah, the bomb physically fails to detach from the wing.
So you have a live bomb, fully armed, just stuck in the wing of the drone.
Exactly, and the physical implications are immediate. The drone is now asymmetrical. It has a heavy weight on one wing and nothing on the other.
Oh, man.
The pilot has to fight the controls just to keep it flying straight. Now they have to carefully note all the switch positions, safe the systems, and somehow fly this unstable drone back to base with a live weapon.
Again, nothing like a video game.
Not at all.
But all right, we've established the intense domestic rules, the heavyweight physics, and the training restrictions. What happens when this drone is deployed overseas for its primary lethal mission?
That's where things get really complicated.
Yeah, the RAND Corporation report breaks down the international laws of targeted killing, and honestly, reading through it gave me a headache.
It's dense.
Very. How does this legal framework actually function in practice?
So the RAND report structures this legal labyrinth as a series of 3 interlocking gates. For a strike to be considered legitimate under international law, it has to pass through all applicable gates.
Okay, let's walk through it. Imagine a drone operator tracking a truck leaving a suspected militant compound in a foreign country.
Perfect.
I've got the truck on screen. Gate 1 is the UN Charter, specifically Article 51. What does that mean for my truck?
Gate 1 basically asks, do you have a right to use force in this country at all? Article 51 deals with a nation's inherent right to self-defense against an armed attack.
Okay.
If your nation is attacked, you can respond. But the ambiguity is, what if the truck is just planning an attack? How imminent must the threat be to justify a preemptive strike?
Right.
Furthermore, does the host state consent to your drone operating in its airspace? If they don't consent, firing a missile violates their sovereignty, unless you can legally prove their government is unwilling or unable to handle the threat themselves.
Okay, so let's say the lawyers back at the Pentagon determine the host country is unable to stop the truck.
So Gate 1 is cleared.
Right. We arrive at Gate 2. International Humanitarian Law, or IHL.
IHL is the law of war, but it only applies if you are officially in an armed conflict.
Meaning what, exactly?
The violence has to reach a minimum intensity and duration with organized groups. If you meet that threshold, your strike on the truck must satisfy 4 criteria. First, distinction. Are you absolutely sure the people in the truck are combatants and not civilians?
Okay, that's one.
Second, proportionality. If there is a civilian walking near the truck, does the military advantage of destroying the truck outweigh the anticipated harm to the bystander?
Ibis.
Third, humanity. Are you using a weapon that avoids unnecessary suffering? And finally, military necessity. Is destroying this truck actually required to achieve a legitimate military goal?
That is a staggering amount of calculation. But wait, what if we aren't officially in an armed conflict in that specific country? What if the violence hasn't reached that sustained threshold?
The Gate 2 doesn't apply at all. You fall into Gate 3, International Human Rights Law, or IHRL.
And according to the RAND report, IHRL is much stricter.
Immensely stricter. It treats the situation almost like domestic law enforcement. Under IHRL, lethal force is only legal if it is required to protect human life from an immediate threat. And here is the critical part. There must be no non-lethal alternative.
Wait, really? So if there's any chance you could intercept that truck with ground forces and capture the individual instead of killing them, you legally have to try to capture them.
Yes, exactly.
You can't just drop a missile from 15,000 feet.
Precisely. Now, apply this to the broader targeting spectrum the report outlines. If the person in that truck is a confirmed high-level leader, someone like Mullah Akhtar Mansour, it's relatively straightforward to justify the strike.
Right, but it's harder with closely identified operatives, like Abdirahman Santer in Somalia.
Yes.
And the report highlights how legally perilous it gets when you move into signature strikes. This is targeting based merely on suspicious behavior patterns.
Right, you don't know exactly who is in the truck, but it's a specific type of truck that left a weapons cache. Under IHL, in an active war zone, striking might be justifiable as military necessity. But under IHRL, outside a defined war zone, firing on an unidentified group without attempting to capture them would be a massive violation.
The legal context completely dictates the morality and legality of the action, which brings up a massive domestic legal question. The U.S. government relies heavily on the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, the AUMF.
Yeah, passed right after 9/11.
Right, and there's a huge ongoing debate about whether a law designed to target al-Qaeda legally covers associated forces or entirely new groups like ISIL.
And the RAND report is critical of this ambiguity because it sets a dangerous global precedent. What happens when near-peer adversaries acquire advanced drones? They will look at the U.S. legal playbook and use those exact same loose definitions to justify their own strikes.
So what does this all mean for the pilot? If a drone operator sees an armed group on their screen, how do they know if they are operating under the IHL gate, where they can strike out of military necessity, or the IHRL gate, where they can only strike if it's literally impossible to capture them? The context completely changes the definition of murder.
And that is exactly why the RAND report argues that the international community needs crystal clear norms. The operator staring at the screen shouldn't be the one figuring out international law in real time. They rely entirely on policymakers and military lawyers to have correctly navigated those three gates beforehand.
It's a staggering amount of pressure. So let's pull all of this together. We started with the tactical evolution of cheap missiles shooting down $30,000 Shahed drones.
Right, the economics of war.
Then we moved inside the sterile, checklist-heavy ground control station, exploring the heavyweight physics and hung ordnance. We looked at the strict domestic privacy laws and finally navigated the incredibly complex international legal gates of targeted killing.
It's a dense, overlapping web of mechanical engineering, human endurance, and international law.
And that's exactly why this matters to you. The next time a news alert pops up about a drone strike, you'll know it is never just a push-button video game. You will understand the human operators managing heavy fuel loads and the policymakers wrestling with the legal definitions of imminence and proportionality.
Understanding those mechanisms changes how you consume that information.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a brand new thought to mull over. Think about the future we discussed with the MQ-9 program.
The autonomous swarms.
Right. If the next generation of drones uses advanced artificial intelligence to autonomously traverse contested airspace and identify targets in a swarm, who legally walks through the RAND report's three gates?
That is the big question.
Can an AI algorithm legally determine proportionality and humanity? Or will the human programmer sitting safely in a lab thousands of miles away be the one legally responsible for the trigger?
It's a terrifying prospect.
We started by saying distance doesn't remove the complexity of war. But when the machine itself starts making the targeting decisions, maybe the video game analogy becomes terrifyingly real.